So it's been a bit since I've recorded anything for YouTube. Uh, a lot has happened in my life. Some good, some bad, some very bad. But in terms of the good, what has happened is that my friend Adrie Rose and I have a podcast. Yes, I know you're like, of course Stitch has another podcast. Yes, I like hearing myself talk. Or rather, I like you guys hearing me talk. And so our podcast, Pages and Prejudice, can be listened to wherever you listen to podcasts. Spotify is the best way to do that right now, probably because you can also leave comments, and we love comments. I'll put links to our podcast and Adrie's social media in comments or whatever below, because I'm posting on TikTok, so I do a lot of posting in the comments. So one of the things that I wanted to do, because Adrie's doing kind of her own thing on TikTok, is doing like an after the fact episode wrap up on a platform of our choosing. So for me, it's YouTube, because I've had my YouTube channel for a while and I haven't used it in also a while. And so I wanted to use my YouTube channel to just kind of talk about stuff that maybe we didn't get to, and just like rehash stuff that I thought was really cool across the episode. So episode 18 of Pages and Prejudice is all about like spice levels and expectations around heat and desire and sexuality in romance novels. It stems from Adrie coming across some social media like discourse, some posts on either Threads or Twitter about younger adults complaining about the fact that romance novels have sex scenes, which, you know, duh, they do. But conversely, there's this conversation around the language we use when talking about romance novels, right? So before we get to the I can't read romance novels, why are the young adults fucking? Which I'm not even sure if I'm allowed to say that on this platform, but why are the young adults engaging in Congress? Is the idea that the language itself that we use to talk about romance is a little weird, right? It's clean versus filthy, smutty, dirty. You know, there's a lot of judgment baked into the language, even with people trying to reclaim it. A lot of people who don't want to read sex scenes in their romance novels will talk about wholesome books, you know, that series by Alice Osment, Heartstopper, constantly gets called wholesome. I didn't really enjoy it, so I can't give you a lot of thought there. But what sparked a lot of thought for me in this conversation about wholesome, dirty, whatever, this judgmental language, it's actually this book, Hitori Jime, My Hero, which I had seen all over social media as this it was always recommended as wholesome. It was, you know, if you like wholesome romances, please read this. If you haven't read this book, and if you haven't read the blurb for this book on Wikipedia, it is about a student-teacher relationship. And I am very pointedly not making a judgment, because I don't care. I love scum villain, right? But it was not marketed in the same way as scum villain, or fans were not marketing it the same way. Instead of talking about, oh, this is like a really interesting, really fun, light-hearted student-teacher relationship, they just kept saying wholesome over and over and over again as if it meant something. And so even though I normally don't pick up wholesome books, I was like, well, so many people are recommending it, let me check it out. And I was like, oh, I kind of like it, but oh, it is a student-teacher relationship. You know, like, I wasn't able to get appropriately hyped for it, because again, scum villain, right? Love it. And I think that one of the problems with marketing books, or fans marketing books, is that fans don't really have a good idea of what a book is, or what a heat level is, you know? And so that brings us to the spice level, right? Love me some spice. And that specific term kind of replaced the Fanish citrus scale. And I don't know that it should have, because I know what a lemon is. I know what I can expect with a lemon. What some people find spicy, other people don't find spicy. So it's really hard to kind of have a consistent like judgment there. And I think that another thing with that is that we see people talking about heat and spice and how they wish, like as an adult, they're reading young adult fiction because they're like, I don't want to read about sex scenes. And it's like, well, I'm not judging you for not wanting to read about sex scenes, but what comes along with these conversations is this really judgmental, like, oh, so you think 25-year-olds only have sex all the time? Why aren't you writing stories about them fighting demons or not paying their bills or office shenanigans? And it's like, well, you're reading a romance. It is the example of walking into a Home Depot and going, hey, where are the nachos? Well, honey, there are none. They're just not. And you have to enter these spaces with appropriate expectations. I don't expect young adult books to have sexual content in them, mostly because that discourse has been done to death and no author is going to risk the backlash that comes from putting a sex scene in YA. But also because American YA functions differently from like shoujo, right? Like I can pick up a shoujo series and it'll have at some point well down the road of the characters' relationships an implied or on-page sex scene. Black Panther in Sweet 16 has sex on the page. I'm like fairly sure. And that is a shoujo series, I think. There's different expectations for different kinds of media, and you can have expectations for what you read without judging people who read or write it, which is very difficult. I know, I'm a hater. That's the whole point of us being on this podcast. But having it coupled with this, like, oh, why does everybody think young adults have sex all the time? And it's like, well, because a lot of them are. Like, objectively, they are. So I just don't understand a lot of the conversations around like what should or should not be in romance and why there's this air of judgment. I understand that there's something about the cultural zeitgeist and a very sex negative perspective on pop culture that has positive and negative roots. Like it's owing to young adults kind of arguing for more agency and awareness in like sex scenes in movies, right? Like they're thinking so hard about the potential exploitation of actors that they're like, oh, I'm actually good without a sex scene. But that doesn't transfer over to romance. Like a romance novel isn't exploitative beyond the whole we are cogs in a capitalist mill kind of sense. So I think that the approach should be different as readers, and you can also just skip. That's a thing. You can just skip a sex scene if you're not interested in reading it. Like you can skip a sex scene in a movie, you can skip a sex scene in a book. A lot of authors nowadays absolutely tell you like, here is where the spice is. You can skip it. Rather than make a social media post that ends up getting you cooked, flamed even, you can just skip it. You can read YA. And you can keep that you read YA to yourself because you are not the target audience. Because by the way, when adults, like my age, make reading young adult literature a personality and put their adult expectations onto an area, which is like primarily a marketing category, but still is supposed to be tiered for those readers, you're putting your adult expectations into a group of books that is meant for teenagers. You are shifting what those teenage readers can read. Young adult books in 2024 don't actually look a lot like young adult books did when I was a teenager, and part of that, yes, is because teenagers have different concerns and different needs now than they did like a bajillion years ago. But some of it is because a lot of people my age will not stop reading young adult books and trying to be taste and thought makers in those spaces, places like Book Talk or Threads or whatever. And I don't think that it's wrong to be an influencer about these things, obviously. But the way that some people have positioned themselves as like the be-all end-all of young adult literature has shaped teens' access to books that are for and about them, ostensibly. But yeah, so if you liked hearing this, check out Pages and Prejudice wherever you listen to podcasts. Adrie and I are so much funnier than two people have any business being. We are really funny, we are really cute, and we say really smart things amidst some utterly atrocious ones. So thanks for listening, thanks for watching, and check out our podcast. Bye!